The first sign that my guild planned to kill me was not the locked lift or the blood on Grant's glove, it was the apology. Grant had never apologized to anyone in his life. He stood beneath the 6th floor's cracked warning bell, smiled with all the warmth of a knife, and told me he was sorry I would not be coming back. I had spent 3 years carrying weapons for the strongest hunters in the Fang Guild. They called me Mason when they needed a bag lifted and dead weight when they thought I could not hear. My rank crystal had measured almost no combat talent, so Grant turned me into a porter and made my humiliation part of every expedition. I endured it because even a porter could enter dungeons, and I wanted to see what waited at the bottom. Black Maw was supposed to be a routine 5-floor sweep. Instead, Grant used a forbidden key to open the 6th. The door breathed like a living throat. Red light crawled over carvings of wolves, giants, demons, and one dragon circling a jagged crown. The other guild members backed away. I leaned closer. That was why Grant chose me. He kicked my knee from behind and shoved me across the threshold. A silver chain snapped around my ankle. While I fought to stand, the Fang Guild hauled a black metal crown from the wall. Every carved monster opened its eyes. The dungeon shook hard enough to drop stone from the ceiling. Grant held up the crown of fangs and watched the passage collapse between us. A ruler core needs a living offering, he said. For once, Mason, be useful. The lift rose with my guild inside it. Evan, their famous lightning swordsman, stood at Grant's shoulder. He did not look pleased, but he did not stop the doors from closing either. The last thing I saw was Grant waving with my own supply ledger in his hand. Then the floor went dark. Something heavy padded through the dust. I heard claws scratch stone on 3 sides and smelled wet fur before a pair of orange eyes appeared. An ash wolf lunged. Its paw opened my chest from shoulder to ribs and hurled me against the sealed gate. My sword had gone up with the lift. My armor was padded cloth. Grant had even taken the emergency potions. The wolf lowered its head to feed. A pale message burned across my vision. Devour awakens where the abandoned refuse to die. My hand landed on the hot core protruding from the wolf's old chest wound. Hunger struck me so fiercely that my teeth hurt. I pulled the core free. It softened into red light, raced up my arm, and filled my bones with the sound of a hunting pack. The pain in my chest stopped. The darkness changed. I could count every grain of dust falling from the ceiling and hear 6 more wolves spreading through the cavern. Their strength entered my muscles. Their heat settled behind my eyes. One clear rule arrived with it. Consume a slain monster's core, inherit its body, resistance, and strongest gift. The first gift was Predator Step. The wounded wolf attacked again. This time, it seemed to drift toward me. I stepped around its jaws, caught the fur behind its skull, and drove its head into the floor. Stone burst beneath us. I stared at my hand for half a second, then at the pack surrounding me. Grant should have left more wolves. They rushed together. Predator Step pulled me through the gaps between them. I crossed the cavern before a falling drop of my own blood touched the ground. One wolf struck a wall. After biting empty air, another spun as I appeared on its back. By the time the first drop landed, 6 bodies slid across the floor, and the darkness belonged to me. Devouring their cores did not give me 6 different tricks, it deepened what I already had. My hearing reached through walls, cuts closed beneath my torn shirt. My legs felt coiled around an invisible spring. The pack's instinct also pointed me toward the presence ruling the floor. The Alpha Fang waited in a cathedral of black ribs. It was twice the size of a horse, plated in bone, with Grant's sacrificial chain hanging from its jaws. The guild had not awakened the 6th floor by accident. The Crown of Fangs had stolen a fragment from this creature, and now the entire dungeon was opening to reclaim it. I needed the Guardian's core to break the seal. If I failed, Black Maw would digest me before Grant reached the surface. Simple enough. The Alpha howled, and pressure flattened every loose stone around me. Its pounce crossed the cathedral faster than the lesser wolves could move. I did not dodge. I waited until its shadow covered my body, raised both hands, and caught its jaws. The impact buried my feet to the ankles. Bone Fang stopped a finger from my face. The Alpha's eyes widened, as the porter it had chosen for dinner held its mouth open. I twisted. Its massive body sailed over my shoulder, and crashed through 3 rib-shaped pillars. It rose angrier, gathering black wind around its claws. The attack carved trenches through the walls as it charged. I walked into it. Claws struck my chest, but the strength stolen from its pack held my bones together. I caught one leg, swung the Guardian in a complete circle, and smashed it down hard enough to silence the floor. The Alpha tried to pounce one last time. I used Predator Step. For an instant, we crossed in the center of the cathedral. I landed behind it with one hand extended. The Guardian remained frozen in its attack, then the bone plates along its chest split in a perfect line. Its core dropped into my palm. When I consumed it, the dungeon seal shattered. Black wind wrapped around my shoulders like a cloak, and the Alpha's resistance hardened my skin beneath the blood. I took one horn as proof, climbed the ruined lift shaft, and followed the sound of voices toward daylight. Grant had arranged a memorial beside the entrance. He stood before guild banners and told a crowd that I had panicked, stolen the forbidden key, and sacrificed myself to save everyone else. Evan stared at the ground. Several hunters looked bored. A clerk was already carving my name onto a cheap stone. The gate exploded outward behind Grant. I walked through the dust with the Alpha's horn resting on my shoulder. My shirt was cut to ribbons, my eyes still carried the orange shine of the pack, and black wind curled around each step. Nobody cheered, nobody even breathed loudly enough for me to hear. Grant's smile remained in place, but the hand holding the crown tightened. The metal points turned toward me as if they had caught a scent. "You started my funeral early," I said. "Keep the stone. I like the inscription." Evan's fingers moved toward his sword. I looked at him, and his hand stopped. He had fought beside me for years without seeing me throw a punch. Now his lightning was flickering before he had even drawn the blade. Grant recovered first. He accused me of causing the dungeon break, and used his guild authority to suspend my rank. It was a smart performance, and the officials wanted an easy answer. Without an active license, I could not enter another gate. Without more monsters, Devour would remain only a wolf's strength, wearing a human shape. Grant expected me to argue. Instead, I dropped the alpha's horn at the ranking official's feet. The cut surface still radiated enough pressure to crack the memorial stone. "Give me a public trial," I said. "Invite everyone." Grant could not refuse without looking afraid. He announced the trial for the next afternoon, and chose Evan as my opponent. That choice pleased me. If I was going to correct my reputation, I wanted the guild's brightest blade standing in the light when I did it. The grand arena had never been so crowded for a rank dispute. Hunters filled the lower seats, guild recruiters packed the balconies, recording crystals floated over the ring, and Grant sat in a private box with the crown hidden beneath his coat. He had told everyone the dungeon had driven me mad. I arrived after the official called my name twice. My only clean shirt had burned in black maw, so I wore the same torn black coat and carried no weapon. The audience laughed when they saw the guild porter walking into the ring. Evan descended in silver-blue combat clothes while lightning traced his shoulders. He was not a cruel man. Pride was simply the only language he spoke fluently. He drew his narrow sword, and told me to surrender before he embarrassed us both. "You can keep your reputation," I said. "I only need the arena." The starting bell rang. Evan vanished. His flash draw had defeated 40 licensed hunters. Most people saw a blue line, heard the sword return to its sheath, and discovered the match was already over. With Night Eyes and the Alpha's instincts, I saw his front foot turn, his shoulder lower, and every spark choose its path. I moved one step. Evan reappeared behind me. His sword was out, but my fingers held the blade an inch from my neck. The crowd needed several seconds to understand why no blood had fallen. Evan pulled. The weapon did not move. "Again," I said. Anger sharpened him. Lightning flooded the ring, and his next rush came from above. Predator's step carried me behind him before his boots touched the ground. I tapped his shoulder. He spun with 7 blue cuts, each faster than the last. I walked between them and adjusted the loose cuff of my coat. On the 8th strike, I caught the sword with 2 fingers. The lightning died from the tip backward. A crack traveled down the famous blade. Evan stared at it, then at me, and for the first time his pride made room for caution. Grant stood in his box and activated the arena beast cage. He later called it a malfunction. The iron doors tore free, and a horned basilisk charged toward the spectator wall. It was the trial's execution monster, plated in green crystal, and strong enough to crush the first 10 rows. People ran. Evan turned to pursue it, but he was too far away. I remained where I stood. Black wind gathered around my fist, compressed until the entire wolfpack's force became a narrow dark line, and left my hand without a sound. The basilisk split from horn to tail. The strike continued through the empty center of the arena, and stopped exactly at the spectator wall. Not one seat cracked, not one fleeing child was touched. Both halves of the beast slid past the wall, and collapsed in matching piles. The arena became quieter than Black Maw had been. I placed Evan's broken sword back in his hand, and walked to the ranking crystal. It was designed to measure the force a hunter released into it. Grant shouted for the officials to end the trial. I pressed one finger against the glass. Every ranking color flashed at once. The crystal turned black, rang like a bell, and crumbled into sand. The chief official offered me the highest provisional license his rules allowed. I asked for the most dangerous open expedition instead. His answer appeared on every recording crystal in the arena. A migrating horde of stone giants was less than a day from Ironvale, and the city expected to lose its outer districts. Grant immediately volunteered the Fang Guild. He needed the giant king's core. The crown under his coat was pointing east. "Perfect," I said. "Try not to start another funeral without me." By sunrise, Ironvale's walls were shaking. The city had been built around iron foundries, with thick gates and cannon towers that had survived 2 dungeon floods. None of that mattered against creatures made from moving mountain stone. Each giant stood 30 feet tall. Cannon shells burst against their chests, and left dark smudges. Their king walked behind them, taller than the wall, carrying an entire ruined fortress on its back like armor. Every step opened cracks through the road. If it reached the city, the impact alone would flatten the foundry district. Grant placed the Fang Guild on the battlements for the recording crystals. He fired bright attacks, shouted orders, and waited for someone else to expose the king's core. When the front gate buckled, he ordered a retreat to the inner wall. Then he sealed the outer district with civilians still inside it. Kara was outside too. I had never met her, but everyone knew the demolition fighter with bronze gauntlets and the habit of laughing during disasters. She stood on a warehouse roof, punching smaller giants away from a line of escaping families. Her blows shattered their limbs, but the stone regrew whenever their feet touched the ground. I arrived through the smoke from Ironvale's last cannon volley. The giant king swung a club made from a bridge. Its shadow covered the gate, Kara, and half the fleeing crowd. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Grant watched from the inner wall, waiting for the outer district to disappear. I stepped beneath the club, and caught it with one hand. The road collapsed around my boots, the gate behind me did not move. For a moment, the giant king kept pushing, unable to understand why its bridge had stopped in empty air. I tilted my head, shifted my grip, and threw the club backward. It spun over the horde, and erased 3 giants from the road. Kara looked down from the warehouse. "You're the dead porter." The funeral was dull. She laughed once, jumped from the roof, and drove both gauntlets through a giant's knee. I told her to keep the civilians moving while I handled the king. She did not ask whether I could. She shouted for everyone to watch. That saved me the trouble. The smaller giants formed a wall around their ruler. Their regeneration made ordinary attacks useless, but the wolves inside me could hear the low pulse connecting them to the king. I did not need a complicated solution. I moved faster. Predator step carried me across shoulders, fists, and falling slabs. Every time my foot touched a giant, the force of my next step broke its link to the ground. Stone bodies toppled behind me like a row of towers. Cannon crews on the wall stopped firing because they could no longer track which blur was mine. The king ripped the fortress from its back and threw it. Hundreds of tons of broken wall turned across the sky. It would crush the civilians even if I reached the king. I changed direction, ran up a falling giant's arm, and jumped into the fortress's shadow. Both hands met the underside. The weight drove me downward. Wolf strength screamed through every muscle. For the first time since Black Maw, my inherited power was not enough. Kara planted herself below me, bronze gauntlets raised as if she planned to catch a city. "If you drop that," she called, "I'm telling everyone." Spite is an excellent source of strength. I hurled the fortress sideways. It cleared the last warehouse, crossed the wall, and landed in an empty quarry beyond Ironvale. The crash lifted a ring of dust around the entire city. The king finally looked afraid. I landed before it and drove my fist into the center of its chest. Cracks spread across its body but stopped short of the core. It struck me with both hands. The road folded into a crater, and the giant army roared as one. Then I stood up through its fingers. My coat was gone. My skin had bruised, but the Alpha's resistance had kept every bone intact. I caught the king's thumb, tore its hand away from my body, and climbed its arm while it tried to shake me loose. At the shoulder, I plunged through the stone and pulled out a core the size of my head. Devour opened. The core became a river of gold. It poured into my chest, widened my frame, and turned every bruise into a dark stone pattern. Before the marks faded beneath my skin, the giant king's body, resistance, and strongest gift became mine. Titan frame. When the headless king began falling toward Ironvale, I caught it around the waist. The entire city watched me lift a creature taller than its wall. I took 3 steps, turned once, and threw the giant king over the outer gate. Its body flew beyond the foundries, beyond the farms, and struck beside the fortress in the empty quarry. The remaining giants lost their pulse, and collapsed into harmless stone. Dust rolled back toward me. I stood in the crater, checked the strip of cloth still hanging from one wrist, and straightened it as if my ruined sleeve were the most serious damage Ironvale had suffered. Kara landed beside me. That was completely unnecessary. The quarry was already damaged. The soldiers began chanting before the dust cleared. By noon, recording crystals across the region had named me the Maw Hunter. By afternoon, merchants were selling cheap black coats with torn sleeves. Grant's guild had spent years making my weakness famous. In one morning, they had made my return impossible to ignore. Grant did not stay for the celebration. While everyone watched me throw the king, he cut a shard from the exposed core and pressed it into the crown of fangs. The fortress carving on the crown lit red. Far beneath the capital, a locked dungeon floor opened. The sky changed before sunset. A red eclipse swallowed the sun, and black fire began falling toward the city Grant had already fled to. Every bell in Ironvale rang at once. Kara looked at the burning horizon, then at me, smiling like she had finally found an expedition worth attending. I could feel the new gate from 40 miles away. Something on the other side was wearing chains and calling itself a duke. More importantly, Grant now knew I could consume ruler cores. He had stopped trying to ruin my reputation. He was building something strong enough to eat me. We crossed the distance to the capital in less than an hour. I ran while carrying Kara under one arm, because Titan frame made her and both bronze gauntlets feel lighter than my old supply bag. She complained until she noticed the road breaking behind each predator step. Then she demanded that I go faster. The capital's arena district was already burning. Black flames poured from windows without consuming the stone. Anyone touched by them became a standing shadow, trapped inside a memory of their worst fear. Winged demons circled above the roofs and drove civilians toward the open gate beneath the grand arena. Grant had chosen the location carefully. The crowd that watched my rank trial was now fuel for his next ruler. I set Kara down at the north bridge. She cracked her gauntlets together and asked for a plan. I pointed toward the largest number of demons. Keep those away from the people. And you. I looked at the mile-wide curtain of hellfire blocking the arena. I'm taking the front door. The heat had melted every street lamp. Veteran hunters stood 2 blocks away because their armor glowed whenever they approached. Grant's surviving guild members were telling the recording crystals that no human could cross. I walked past them. The first flame touched my hand. Granite skin surfaced as dark gold lines beneath my flesh. The second wrapped around my chest. By the third step, I was inside an inferno that had stopped an entire district's defense. The fire bent around my body, not because I controlled it, but because it could not find anything soft enough to burn. People watched my outline move through the black wall. Halfway across, I heard a building collapse behind me. A family had reached the street, but demon fire was closing from both ends. I planted one foot and raised my palm. Titan frame did not only let me lift heavy things, it let my body become an anchor nothing could displace. I released the giant king's strength into the ground. The street rose in one solid slab. It formed a stone ridge from the north bridge to the arena, sheltering everyone behind it, while the hellfire broke across the top. I kept walking on the burning side. An entire avenue moved through the safe corridor in my shadow. That was when Evan landed ahead of me. His broken sword had been reforged into a shorter blade. Lightning flickered weakly through smoke-blackened clothes, and one side of his face was burned. He had spent the last hour pulling civilians from the arena while Grant's guild guarded its banners. Pride was still in his voice when he said he did not need help, but he had chosen the city before his guild. A horned demon dropped behind him. I killed it with a flick of black wind before Evan turned. "You missed one," I said. "I was testing whether you were paying attention." Kara punched another demon through a tower and shouted that both of us were terrible liars. The grand arena split open. Chains made from red light shot out of the underground gate and hooked into every shadow on the street. The trapped people screamed. Their fear traveled down the chains, feeding the presence below. The demon duke rose through the arena floor on a throne of fused iron. It was 20 feet tall, shaped like a lean armored man, with 4 burning horns and a cloak made from chained shadows. Every frightened heartbeat made its body larger. Grant stood behind the throne wearing the crown of fangs. He had driven the crown's giant shard into the duke's back. As long as the demon fed on the city, Grant could carve away its core. The duke pulled once. Thousands of shadow chains tightened. I closed my raised hand. Titan strength seized the stone ridge. Wolf wind raced along its surface. Every chain crossing the avenue snapped at the same moment. The released fear struck the demon duke like a returning wave, knocking its throne sideways. Grant looked at me through the flames. For the first time, his expression contained no performance at all. He shouted that Devour had turned me into a monster. I considered that accusation, while a winged demon tried to bite my shoulder. Its teeth broke. I tossed it over the arena wall. "You fed me to monsters," I said. "Complain to the chef." Grant tore the giant shard from the throne and fled toward the lower vault. The demon duke blocked my path. I could have chased Grant, but the arena district would burn if I left the ruler alive. More importantly, the duke had spent centuries waiting for an audience. It deserved enough time to disappoint one. Its cloak opened. Fear gathered around its body and transformed it into a black armored giant with 6 arms, each holding a blade of fire. The sky above the arena became a red spiral. Even Kara stopped laughing. Evan ordered the last civilians behind my stone ridge. I walked to the empty throne and sat down. The duke struck with all 6 blades. Black fire swallowed the arena. The iron seats melted into glowing rivers. The recording crystals failed one after another, until only Grant's private crystal remained above the gate. Through it, everyone in the region saw the same thing, the demon duke pouring its ultimate attack onto one chair. When the fire finally thinned, I was still seated. Granite skin covered my arms. My boots rested in molten iron. I brushed a coal from my knee and looked up at the ruler. "Were you finished?" The duke stepped back. I left the throne with one predator step. My fist entered its armored chest before the sound of my movement reached the walls. The first impact broke 2 arms. The second lifted the duke above the arena. On the third, I used Titan frame and drove it downward. The arena floor collapsed into the dungeon below. We fell through a column of black fire. The duke tried to hold me with fear chains, but I had already survived the only death that frightened me, being erased as someone else's disposable porter. Its chains found nothing to tighten around. I landed standing on its chest. The ruler's core burned behind its armor like a second sun. I pulled it free while the duke clawed at my wrist, then held the flame above my mouth. Devour consumed the sun. Cold silence filled the dungeon. Then heat entered my blood without burning it. The black flames in the streets stopped, reversed, and streamed through every crack toward me. The duke's strongest gift unfolded from my shadow as links of dark fire. Dominion chains. Its hellfire heart made all flame harmless to me, but the chains were the real prize. Anything born from the duke's fire now recognized my command. I rose from the crater with the entire district's inferno compressed into a sphere above one hand. The sphere was smaller than an apple. Every winged demon in the sky stopped fighting. One by one they folded their wings and knelt on rooftops. Kara stared at the black sun balanced over my finger. "Please don't drop that. The quarry is too far away." I closed my fist. The fire vanished. Grant had reached the arena vault during the battle. The crown let him steal a sliver from the duke before I consumed it, and that sliver completed the final carving. A roar rolled across the red eclipse. Clouds split above the capital, revealing a vast island of broken temples, suspended in the storm. Sky Grave had opened. Grant climbed toward it on a staircase of red chains. At the top waited the ancient storm dragon whose pulse powered every dungeon gate in the region. If its core was torn free, Skygrave would fall. If Grant fused it with the crown first, every copied monster would answer to him. Evan came to the edge of the crater. His reforged sword was nearly melted. He looked at the kneeling demon host, the extinguished district, and the throne I had left standing in the center of destruction. "How much of that did you have at Ironvale?" "None of the fire." "That isn't what I asked." Kara laughed hard enough to lean against the wall. We had minutes before Grant reached the dragon. Kara ordered the demons to carry civilians away from the arena. The creatures obeyed because Dominion chains burned behind my words. Evan cut a path through the remaining falling debris. I stepped onto the first red chain and looked up at Skygrave. The whole capital was watching this ascent. I could have jumped straight to the island. I climbed slowly enough for the storm to illuminate me. Kara noticed. You waited for the lightning. The chain was slippery. Grant reached Skygrave first. The floating island held a circular temple surrounded by statues of every ruler whose core had fed the dungeon network. He stood before the dragon statue and pushed the crown onto his head. Wolf wind, giant stone, and demon fire burst from his body. The copies changed him. Bone fangs covered his shoulders, one arm swelled into granite, black fire ran through cracks in his skin. He grew until the temple floor broke beneath his feet, a human shape forced to carry powers that had never accepted him. He called himself the master of every monster. I stepped onto the island and looked behind him. Where are they? Grant attacked with copied predator step. To ordinary eyes he vanished. To the wolves inside me, he moved like an injured animal dragging chains. I turned, caught his throat, and ended his first dramatic charge against a pillar. He answered with the giant king's strength. A granite fist drove me across the temple and through a statue. Grant laughed when the dust covered me. He had dreamed of that sound since my return. I came out carrying the broken statue so it would not fall on Evan. Then I set it down. Grant's copied stone arm cracked from the impact. Mine had not. Fragments, I said. You built your throne from leftovers. Rage fed the crown. Grant unleashed wolf speed and giant force together, circling me in a storm of blows. Each punch shattered another section of Skygrave. I let him complete the combination, then I activated Predator Step inside his own attack. Grant struck empty air. I appeared behind him and tapped the crown with one finger. Half its points broke away. The demon shard exploded. Hellfire covered his body, restoring the broken stone and shaping wings from his back. He rose above the temple, laughing again, and sent a flood of black flame toward Evan and Kara on the chain bridge. Dominion chains opened from my shadow. The fire stopped in mid-air. I pulled once, and every flame left Grant's wings. They gathered around my arm as a dark mantle while he dropped back to the island. Evan stared up from the bridge. The admission clearly hurt him more than his burns. Mason, yes, your speed is better. The ancient dragon woke before I could enjoy that properly. Skygrave split from end to end. A head larger than the grand arena rose beneath the temple, covered in midnight scales with silver lightning moving between them. Two wings unfolded beyond the horizon. The dragon had not been sleeping under the island. The island was armor on its back. Grant had cracked the crown against the dragon's binding horn. The creature rejected him immediately. One glance stripped the remaining copied power from his limbs. Grant fell to his knees, suddenly human except for the crown fused into his skull. The dragon inhaled. Storm clouds across the region bent toward its mouth. The coming breath would erase Skygrave and continue into the capital. I had power enough to kill the dragon, but dropping its body would destroy more than the breath. My objective changed. I had to defeat something the size of a mountain while keeping it in the sky. That sounded worth watching. I drove Dominion chains into the four corners of Skygrave and anchored them to my shadow. Titan frame spread through my body until gold stone patterns covered my arms and neck. Predator step gathered black wind around my feet. For the first time, three rulers moved together inside one human frame. The dragon released its breath. A column of white lightning descended toward the city. I stepped in front of it and raised one hand. The beam stopped against my palm. Skygrave's temples vanished behind me. Clouds split for hundreds of miles. Below my hand, however, the capital remained inside a perfect circle of clear air. People in the streets looked up at the thin human silhouette holding back a dragon sky. The pressure drove my feet through the island's shell. Granite skin fractured. Even Titan frame bent beneath a force that had powered every open dungeon for centuries. I used Predator step forward. One step carried me into the breath. The next took me farther up the beam. Lightning tore away the remains of my clothes and filled every crack in my skin with white fire. I kept climbing while the dragon poured more power into its attack. Its eyes widened as I approached its mouth. At the end of the beam, I closed my hand around the dragon's upper fang and pulled myself onto its head. The breath cut off. Silence struck the sky. I drove my fist between its horns. The dragon dropped one wing and rolled. Skygrave turned upside down over the capital. Dominion chains held the island together, but Grant slid toward the edge. He clawed at the fused crown, begging it to give his copies back. Kara caught Grant by the ankle. She could have saved him quietly. Instead, she swung him into the stone and called it repayment for Ironvale. The dragon climbed above the clouds with me still on its head. Lightning gathered across its scales, forming an armor no weapon had ever pierced. I had no weapon. I pressed both hands into the scales and let Hellfire Heart release its full heat. Black flame and white lightning collided. The storm armor turned purple, cracked, and burst outward in a ring visible beyond the horizon. The dragon twisted and struck me with its tail. I crossed the sky like a falling star, broke through a floating tower, and stopped against the far edge of Skygrave. For one breath, my arms would not move. The creature had finally produced an attack worthy of its reputation. Grant saw me down and started laughing again. He pulled free of Kara, climbed onto the highest broken altar, and commanded the dragon with the crown's last point. The dragon looked at him, then it lowered its head and roared. The sound tore the crown from Grant's skull. He flew backward and landed at my feet, stripped of every copied fragment. I stood while he tried to crawl away. He asked what I planned to do to him. I had imagined several answers in Black Maw. None felt as satisfying as the truth. Nothing. He stepped over him and faced the dragon. Being ignored broke Grant more completely than any attack. He had sacrificed me because he believed power meant choosing who mattered. Now the strongest battle in the world continued without him. Evan dragged him onto the chain bridge before the island rolled again. The dragon folded its wings and dived. Storm force compressed around its horns until the air became a silver blade. If I dodged, it would cut Skygrave in half. If I blocked without control, the shock would hit the capital, and planted 1 foot on the broken altar. Dominion chains tightened around the island. Titan frame locked my bones. Hellfire heart turned the storm around my fist purple-black. Wolf instinct fixed on the exact point between the dragon's horns. I let it come. The silver blade touched my knuckles. For a fraction of a second, the entire sky stopped. Then my punch traveled through the dragon's charge. Purple fire split the storm from the center. The shock climbed harmlessly into space, opening a circular hole in the clouds. I passed the dragon in silence. It continued beyond me, wings extended, eyes still bright. I landed on empty air, standing on storm pressure I had stolen from the collision. Behind my back, a line of black fire appeared between the dragon's horns. The line spread down its enormous body. The storm dragon separated into light. Every piece curved away from the capital and flowed upward, forming the shape of a dragon around the moon. At its center floated a core filled with silent lightning. I reached into the glowing shape and took it. Devour had never felt hunger like that. The core entered my chest. My heartbeat became thunder heard across the region. Silver lines crossed the gold patterns on my skin. The sky gathered beneath my feet, and a ring of lightning formed behind my head without making a sound. The dragon gave me its ancient body, its immunity to the storm, and its greatest power, Dragon Roar. I did not need to use it on the dragon. I turned toward Skygrave. The broken crown was trying to rebuild itself around Grant, pulling loose monster fragments from the island. Wolf heads, stone arms, and burning wings rose into a shapeless army behind him. Grant stood at its center and screamed that everything I had belonged to his guild. I inhaled once. Dragon Roar crossed the island as a silver wave. It did not touch Kara, Evan, or the chain bridge beneath them. It passed around every temple fragment I had anchored. Only the false monsters came apart. The crown of fangs lifted from Grant's head, cracked into 4 pieces, and turned to dust. No explosion followed. No grand final speech survived. Grant stood alone on the altar wearing scorched guild clothes, while the copied army vanished around him. The silence afterward traveled through every recording crystal still connected to the capital. I descended from the empty sky and landed in front of him. Grant tried to say my old rank. The word would not come. I was faster than the wolves he had stolen, stronger than the giant he had abandoned a city to claim, master of the demon fire he had used on civilians, and heir to the dragon that refused him. The gap had become too large even for denial. Kara broke the silence by asking whether I could throw Skygrave into the quarry. The quarry has suffered enough. Evan looked at the dragon-shaped storm circling the moon, and claimed his repaired sword could have done something similar with more time. Kara laughed. I allowed him the lie because he had finally chosen the correct audience for it. With the dragon's power inside me, keeping Skygrave aloft was effortless. I released the Dominion chains one at a time, and lowered the floating island into the empty plains beyond the capital. It landed softly enough that the grass around its edge remained standing. That display frightened people more than the battle. Destroying a mountain was power they could understand. Setting one down without bending a blade of grass was control they had never imagined. By morning, the demon host guarded the ruined gates under my command. Ironvale sent a new black coat reinforced with giant silk. The ranking council stopped trying to measure me, and created a title instead. Every guild in the region agreed on it before I bothered to ask. One-man monster army. Grant survived. That was not mercy. He had to live in a world where every tavern replayed the moment I stepped over him to fight the dragon, and every child wore a torn black coat, while pretending not to hear his name. Evan left the Fang Guild, and announced that he would surpass me. Kara joined him only long enough to bet against him. I returned to Black Maw 3 days later. The memorial stone still stood beside the gate, split by the Alpha's horn. Someone had corrected the inscription. It no longer said I died saving the Fang Guild. It said I came back hungry. The deeper floors opened when I approached. Wolves lowered their heads. Stone guardians moved aside. Demons extinguished their flames. Every monster could feel the rulers living inside me, and every core sounded like a distant invitation. I rested one hand on the cracked memorial, and looked down into the dark. Far beyond the city, beyond Skygrave, beyond every map dungeon, the ocean rose in a circle without wind. Something beneath it opened an eye large enough to reflect the moon. The dragon's memory recognized that presence, and went still inside my chest. At last, I had found a monster that did not kneel. I smiled and stepped into the gate.